Welcome in, Draft Nicks. Time to go on the clock here at Draft Nation. Check out draftnation.com. Set up your free account today and stay up to date on what all of your favorite teams are doing to prepare for the future. Whether it's Major League Baseball teams getting ready to dive headlong into the offseason, NFL teams, well, not being able to do much at this point past the trade deadline, but get down the stretch and into the playoffs, and if not, position themselves for next year's draft. Maybe it's the NBA and the NHL as those leagues get started, NBA Cup underway, all of that. But what ties closely into the biggest draft in the world, really, the NFL draft, is college football. Who better to talk with about it than from Draft Nation, our guy Cole Muzio. Cole, how you doing today? And thanks for taking the time.
What's up, brother? It's always a fun time to talk college football,
Absolutely,
and especially in this new world, man. This 12-team playoffs is going to be crazy.
Yeah, new set of rankings released as we're speaking right now, about 12 hours ago. By the time people download this, it'll be a day closer probably to another wild weekend, especially in the SEC. And that's where I wanted to start with you, Cole, is we've got this 3-horse race right now. It appears to be between Bama, Ole Miss, and Georgia, with Georgia somehow right now on the outside looking in. Now, it's not a somehow in a lot of people's minds. It's, well, they lost to the other two, Chris. But then the eye test would tell you maybe they're a better team. The SEC has been completely confounding and mystifying, but also absolutely intriguing to me this year. I thought we'd have a little bit more stratification, but instead it's just been every man for themselves at the top of this conference, and it feels as wide open as it's ever been for spots, I guess, 2 through 4 in the conference and what may be the final couple spots in the playoff from the SEC.
Yeah, I think the conversation in these remaining weeks is going to be how severely is the SEC punished for being a deep football league. The Big Ten obviously has some really good teams at the top. I don't think anyone can fairly dispute that Oregon deserves the number 1 overall ranking. Ohio State is a good football team, as is Penn State. I think everyone is eager to see how Indiana finishes the season. But after that, the Big Ten's got nothing. The SEC week in and week out, you're playing elite teams. Georgia has the second best win of anybody in the entire country by going into Austin and beating Texas. And it wasn't close.
Yeah.
But then they've got those losses against Alabama and Ole Miss who lost to Kentucky at home. And then you got Tennessee right there as well in the mix. It's a wild, SEC terrain right now. And even this week, you've got Missouri versus South Carolina. And that could, in a few different scenarios, have playoff implications. Just as you go down the ranking, I think those guys are 21 and 23. And if you're looking at the SEC potentially having, a couple 3-loss teams in the mix, it's a deep league. You have to bring it every single week. And a few of these surprise losses in the SEC have created some chaos.
Yeah, let's start with Georgia, Tennessee this weekend. That feels like, the first step into climbing back into the top 12, or at least into the 12 teams that would go to the playoff for Georgia, would involve a win over the Vols. What's been startling to me, and maybe not startling because I wasn't necessarily as high on him as some other folks, but Carson Beck has not looked like the guy that we were advertised all summer he would be. He's had moments, certainly. The second half against Bama is one that pops into mind. Against Clemson early in the year. But there's been a whole lot of other spots where you look at Carson Beck and say, I don't know if this is the guy, if this is the bill of goods that we were sold. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what it's done watching Georgia, I hate to say struggle, because to your point, the losses they have are against very good teams. They have one of the best wins in the country this year. But to a lot of college football fans' eyes, Georgia's struggling because, they don't look as almighty powerful as they have the last couple of years. How is all of this going to affect Beck's draft stock, in your opinion?
I mean, to your point, for years, Georgia wanted a quarterback with all the arm talent in the world. They had Stetson Bennett, and they just looked at, this guy was a winner, but they wanted the prototypical quarterback that was going to be taken high on draft day. Now they've got that guy. I think they're wishing to have a little bit of the Stetson Bennett magic back. Yeah. Carson Beck's draft stock is definitely severely down. I mean, I think you were looking at a guy who, if he performed adequately this season, given the amount of time that he would spend on the big stage, that he was primed for the number 1 overall selection. And I think at this point, you're looking at a day 2 type draft pick at best. He could falter even further. And this is a guy I think you're going to increasingly see as I talk to people that are semi-close to the Georgia program. A lot of the fan buzz is NIL has gotten to him. The trappings of money early in life, being able to, spend it, have the nice car, have the attention that's brought has kind of led to a poorer performance than expected. And this is now the thing that these 18, 19, 20-year-olds are going to have to deal with in college football is they've got money, they've got resources, they've gotten rich quicker than they were before. How do they handle this? Because you've seen 22, 23, 24-year-olds once they hit the draft and they get that first paycheck. You've seen a lot of guys falter at that point, but now you're having these temptations hit younger kids and they're having to deal with it early. And I think Carson Beck is struggling with that. He's struggling with the attention on a Georgia program that has been elite, and his performance has really suffered. And he's not a first-round draft pick as of now.
What's interesting is as we talk about quarterbacks and stock for the draft in spring of 2025, the 2 top ones on the quarterback board that I see most people have ranked as the top 2 quarterbacks on the board right now are in conferences where they'll probably get one, maybe if they're lucky, 2 teams, right? We got Shedeur Sanders at Colorado, who are still alive in the playoff race. It would involve having to run the table and win the Big 12 title game, most likely over a BYU team that's still undefeated. And then you got Cam Ward at Miami, who stumbled this past week, but still have the inside position on not just the trip to the ACC title game, but we would presume a win in that ACC title game and maybe even a bye into the top 4 in the playoff if they were to beat, say, SMU or maybe a Clemson if they're able to sneak into that game. What's your read on, I guess, those 2 quarterbacks in particular, Sanders and Ward, and how much the CFP, not just in Ward's case, because we know that Miami's, I don't want to say we know they're in the playoff, but most likely in the playoff. But in Colorado's case, to be able to storm back from a difficult start to the season and a difficult end to last year and get into the playoff, yes, they've got Travis Hunter, a Heisman candidate playing both sides of the ball, but I would presume that a lot of that would go into improving Shedeur Sanders' draft stock as well.
Yeah, I think, and I wouldn't, punch Miami's ticket just yet. They have no margin for error. And Colorado doesn't either, but Miami, if they lose another game, this is where the craziness happens. I mean, nobody expected Miami to lose to Georgia Tech this week. Colorado is definitely an interesting thing because Shedeur Sanders is the presumed number 1 overall pick at this point. He is in the best position to be taken first overall, but nobody's really seen Colorado play anybody. Right. And so if Shedeur can get in the playoff, have the attention, go against good rosters, see how he handles the extra media attention because he's been under a lot of scrutiny, obviously, because of his father and the unique nature of the Colorado program. How does Shedeur handle that spotlight? How does he perform against elite competition? Last year, one of the great things that he put on tape was, he would make wow plays, but he didn't turn the ball over. Right. And he keep protecting the football at an elite level when you're going against elite competition. But yeah, those 2 guys have definitely separated themselves. I think it's a very weak quarterback class. You got a lot of quarterback needy teams. My Raiders again are desperate for a quarterback. And how does that work out? When it comes draft time, I think a lot of people are going to be watching. But Shedeur Sanders right now is definitely that number 1 overall quarterback. Cam Ward has just incredible pocket presence. He can make the incredible throw, but he doesn't check a lot of the typical NFL boxes. And he's definitely an older player, so people are counting on him being a little bit more developed at this point. Jalen Milroe is one that people are going to continue to watch, though I question his arm talent. But with a lot of quarterback needy teams, there's still a lot to be desired in this quarterback class.
And I want to bring one up because in your most recent write-up at draftnation.com and looking at the playoff teams and maybe one player from each of those teams, and folks can go check that out now at draftnation.com, you mentioned a guy who's been key to a surprise team this year, and it brings us back around to that Big Ten that you mentioned at the beginning. Curtis Rourke has been interesting to watch because Indiana, without him, was able to win. This is a guy who, like you said, advanced experience and age, kind of like a Cam Ward, is good at the collegiate level. You make that transfer from a MAC school like Ohio to Indiana, and you make the most of it. I think a completion percentage around like 72% right now, playing extremely well. But that question of, how much is that him and how much is that simply experience, being in some cases 2, 3, maybe 4 years older than some of the guys he's playing against.
Yeah, he's 24 years old, and he's in a great offensive system. He certainly has maximized that. Indiana hasn't played anybody, but NFL scouts are going to be watching that Ohio State game very, very closely, because this is a guy that has typical, prototypical tools. He's got a big arm. He's a big kid. He can move a little bit. He can make all the throws. How does he perform against that Ohio State level competition? Because he has been down at Ohio for most of his career. This is something that, when you look at late risers in a quarterback class where people have a lot of tape on Jalen Milroe, they've got a lot of tape on Carson Beck, they're not enthralled with what they're seeing. They've got a guy in Cam Ward that doesn't necessarily fit what you're typically looking for with a first-round NFL draft pick. There's going to be a whole lot of drama around Shedeur Sanders. They're going to look for who else could potentially who else has the talent and ability to give our roster what we need. And Curtis Rourke definitely is a guy that will be watched and scrutinized very heavily. And if they get in the playoffs, the Indiana Hoosiers as a college football playoff team, pretty wild to think about.
Yeah.
That's a guy that I think is going to get a lot of attention. And, you've seen NFL teams, I'm not going to say reach, but you've seen NFL teams get really excited by a guy who comes on for 1 year. Mm-hmm. Blake Bortles is a guy that comes to mind that had all the physical tools, had a great year at UCF, and then gets taken really high. You could see a lot of movement for Rourke come draft time.
Let's go back to the playoff setup as it would be right now. And we're only through 2 sets of rankings here, and we've got a ways to go. Obviously, a couple weeks of the regular season left, conference championships as well. What stands out to you as maybe the biggest surprise right now? If it's aside from Georgia being the first team out after those losses to Bama and Ole Miss, or is it something else that you look at right now and go, man, that's shocking to me?
I'm a little bit surprised at how well Penn State is regarded. They are not, they've not beaten anybody. Mm-hmm. Their best win is a loss against Ohio State. That was relatively close. So I think, again, that's the challenge of the Big Ten, is that you have really good teams at the top, but the week in, week out schedule is really bad. Penn State being number 4 in the rankings is a little bit jarring. SMU being out of the playoffs, I think the Mustangs are not getting the respect they deserve. I think that's definitely something that I would watch very closely. A little bit surprised to see Boise State continue to get the love they're getting. I think Boise State is a legitimate playoff contender, but SMU has some good wins, and they've got opportunity ahead. And I think you're going to see some of these teams leapfrog each other with what they have, ahead on their schedule. I mean, can Georgia really be left out of the playoff, even if they lose another game? If they beat Tennessee, if they've beaten Tennessee and Texas, can you really leave a 3-loss Georgia team out of the playoff? I think those are some of the questions coming up. But as I look at those rankings, Penn State being as high as they are is a little bit surprising to me, as well as Georgia being left out. And then SMU, I think they deserve more respect. That's a good football program right now.
I think it's a good point. I mean, as a Penn State alum, I look at it and say, wait, they've got 1 loss and Indiana's undefeated. I get it. And the schedules are very, very similar. I understand Indiana still has the Buckeyes on the schedule, but I totally get where you're coming from in that question of, okay, why is this undefeated team ahead of this 1-loss team? Again, Indiana hasn't played Ohio State yet. But I think I understand Hoosier fans' level of frustration with the rankings as they are. And I think it's a really interesting point you make about SMU and Boise State and where they're located in relation to each other, because I think that could set off a chain reaction that's going to be really interesting to watch the weekend of conference championship games. If SMU is to upset, let's say, Miami in the ACC championship game, or let's say SMU goes in there and plays competitively against Miami, takes it down to the wire, takes it into overtime maybe, and Boise State, all that's left on their schedule is what? A conference championship game against a UNLV, who they've already proven themselves against. Mm-hmm. Yes, Boise State will get in there. Obviously, they'll be the group of 5 champion, but you'll have an SMU team that maybe proves themselves ahead of that. And I think the ripple effect could be those 3 SEC teams that we started talking about today are all looking at it going, come on, 2 ACC teams? Come on, really? Are we going to go are we going to go Miami and SMU? Are we going to go Miami and Clemson, or whatever the ACC shakeout could be, because of the relative ranking of SMU to the top 12 right now? I think would be really fascinating to watch. I, like you, like the eye test tells you that even Bama, in a down year for Bama, or Georgia, or Ole Miss, is probably a better team than an SMU or a Clemson. But I wonder if results on the field, especially the last few weeks of the season, would end up getting one of those or multiple of those SEC teams that are on the fridge bumped.
Yeah, and that's gonna be one of the wild things to watch as we get closer to the culmination of this. There was so much talk with expanding to 12 teams. Well, it's gonna shrink the debate a little bit, because we may argue over 12 and 13 which team deserves to be in. Just like we've argued over who was 4 and who was 5, but you're gonna have 7 teams that you're arguing about where they were placed. I mean, is number 8 really all that different than number 14?
Right.
And I think you're going to see a lot of fan bases get upset by their team's number 17 ranking, that they think that they should have been in the top 12 based on a certain loss they had, or based on their record. You're going to have a lot of fan bases get angry. It's going to be interesting to see, does this 12-team playoff really satisfy everybody, given the number of teams that will stake a claim based on having 2 losses, 3 losses, but the quality of those losses. You're going to have a lot of fan bases unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, you can even look at this week's set of rankings as a scenario for something that could play out where, the teams that are the first or second team out will have claims to being frustrated or just downright angry. I mean, let's use the example. That 11-6 game, I think, is going to be an interesting one to watch. In this week's current rankings, it would be Ole Miss seeded 11th against Penn State seeded 6th. And is it totally unrealistic to see Lane Kiffin go into Beaver Stadium, especially if he's not dealing with any kind of weather, and maybe upset Penn State? Again, as a Penn State fan and alum, I wouldn't be totally shocked by it. James Franklin failing a big game? What? And then all of a sudden, if you're that team, if you're Georgia, in this scenario, you can say, well, wait, we could have done the same thing. And then all of a sudden, the winner of that game is going to play BYU on a neutral field, or Colorado on a neutral field. And it really does open up the world of possibilities to, you know what? We were the first or second team out, but we really feel like if the committee would have looked at us differently, we could have found our way to the semifinals.
Yeah. And you have there's no pattern to say right now that, is this going to be a scenario where the teams that get the first round bye are consistently going to be winning the playoff? We don't know.
Right.
And if you see one of those 7 or 8 seed teams win this whole thing, it's going to make those fan bases that were just on the outside, it's going to make them all the more angry. But you mentioned something I think is going to be really fun as you look at some of these matchups, just to imagine those playing out.
Yeah,
it is going to be really fun as a college football fan when you picture Indiana versus Bama, when nobody would think that those 2 programs would be on the same field, but it's going to be fun to watch it. When you see Tennessee versus Notre Dame in a game that really matters, those are 2 rabid fan bases. There's a lot of success in the history of those programs. To see those 2 guys go at it with an opportunity, to win this whole thing, that's a high stakes college football game with 2 good programs. It's gonna be a lot of fun to watch. And those are normally games that you see like the Gator Bowl or Outback Bowl,
right,
or whatever it's been over the course of the years. But this is going to be for something that really matters.
Yeah. Let me take it back to the teams that are at the top of the rankings, Cole. We agree. Oregon's undisputed number 1 right now. They got the best quarterback in the country, too, I think, in Dylan Gabriel, who is someone who maybe has, or at least he's playing the best quarterback right now, I guess is the best way to put it, which is something that I don't want to say has fallen off the radar, but a lot of folks talk about Oregon every week and kind of take for granted that Dylan Gabriel is going to go out there and complete 80% of his passes, and the Ducks are just going to efficiently march up and down the field. You get to Ohio State ranked at number 2, and it's Will Howard, who, again, despite maybe proving himself to a certain extent in Happy Valley, has still got a lot of questions about him. You got Quinn Ewers at number 3, Texas, Drew Aller, number 4, Penn State. As you look at the quarterbacks, especially for the top ranked teams right now, do you see a clear advantage for any of those teams, maybe 1 through 4, 1 through 5 teams that may be getting a bye at the quarterback position? Because Mine would be clearly Gabriel because of the efficiency that he's worked with this year. But I'm curious what your thought is.
Efficiency and consistency. He's a guy that week in, week out, you tend to know what you're going to get. Quinn Ewers, snap to snap, you don't know what you're going to get. Drew Aller, is a good quarterback. Is he a great quarterback? Will Howard's not a great arm. You're going to rely on that running game. And so, but Dylan Gabriel is a guy that's going to put Oregon in a position to win every week. He's not prone to making a whole lot of mistakes. This is his 6th year of college football, 6th year of really playing college football. And, he's a unique, again, we're about to see this COVID year go away, and all these guys that have been around for forever and breaking all these, game records and things like that just, how is this guy still in college? Those questions will go away soon. But Dylan Gabriel, I think folks should enjoy his remaining time in college football because he's not really an NFL prospect. But how he closes out his career in Oregon will be fun to watch, and definitely gives the Ducks an advantage in the playoff.
Over the last couple weeks of the regular season, before we push into conference championships, because maybe we can catch up again at that time, I'm just curious, non-quarterback wise, who are some players you're keeping an eye on in these last couple of weeks of the regular season that maybe people haven't been keeping a close eye on, or they've been too busy watching those guys on the other side of the ball, the quarterbacks, like we spent most of today's conversation talking about? I think of like a Michael Williams at Georgia or a Tyler Batty at BYU. Maybe it's one of those guys. Is there somebody else that you're looking at saying, man, this guy's got the chance, whether it be on the other side of the ball or as a skill position guy who's not a quarterback, to help his team finish the season strong?
So, I'm really watching the running back position, overall. I think this is a pretty weak draft class. I think it's really bad at quarterback. And across the board, I'm not overly enthralled with where this draft class sits, but the running back position is very strong. And I referenced Ohio State's running game. You got 2 premier running backs, with Ohio State. Ashton Jeanty with Boise State is a very good running back. They could make a run, towards the playoffs. Omarion Hampton with North Carolina is a very good running. It is a stacked running back class. And so as you're looking for separation among these guys, watch the running back position. Edge rusher is always something that NFL teams are looking for, and particularly in a weak quarterback class, you're going to see an edge rusher or 2 in that top 5. A lot of the guys, Michael Williams included, James Pierce over with Tennessee, those guys have not put up the monster performances that one would have expected going into the season. They've got all the talent in the world. They have, NFL potential. Mm-hmm. They check a lot of the boxes. They put better stats up last year. Can those guys on the big stage, I think Michael Williams against Texas really put together a stellar performance. James Pierce has, I think, played really well against Alabama. So when they've been, all eyes have been on them, they've showed out. Can they do so with these highly anticipated playoff matchups, in conference championship games and games where it really matters? Can those guys show out? Because you're not going to have quarterbacks drafted 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're going to have, Shadur Sanders is going to go in that top 3, probably number 1 overall. Cam Ward will float somewhere probably in the top half of the draft, but I'm not seeing him as a top 5 quarterback. Some NFL team could talk themselves into that idea, but that's not where his talent level is. So that gives opportunity for a lot of these offensive linemen. And look, let's be real, none of our listeners are going to be watching the offensive linemen in the remaining weeks, but the edge rushers are going to have a lot of opportunity to really rise in the draft. So running back, how do those guys stack up? And look, in the NFL, some of your best running backs right now are guys that are in their second contract. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, the longevity of the running back position seems to have been extended by a year or 2. So you're going to see, I think, 2 or 3 running backs maybe taken in the first round for the first time in a while. And so how do those guys position themselves in the close of this season? I think it's going to be one of the fun things to watch.
Man, possible 5-12 matchup right now would be Ohio State against Boise. How about Ashton Jeanty, Travion Henderson, and Quinshon Judkins all in the same game?
That's elite. That's elite. Those guys are some of the best running backs we've seen in college football in a long time, and so fans should really take the opportunity to watch that if given the opportunity, because you're going to see some really good running back play.
Cole, thanks so much for the time today, man. I really do appreciate it. Again, draftnation.com. Go check out Cole's latest piece that talks about a lot of these players, the teams, and how it all relates to how you're going to be watching the last couple of weeks of the regular season, conference championships, and, of course, the CFP once that field is set. Thanks again for going on the clock with me this morning.
Thanks, brother.